We'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to talk about markets. How many of you guys feel like you've done a good job marketing this crop this year? How many of you guys feel like you haven't had a whole lot of opportunities? Yeah. And so I talked about this earlier today. If you heard me earlier today, you're probably going to hear a lot of the same stuff. But I get frustrated with social media. I feel like I just shouldn't even go on there sometimes. But when I go on there right now, and there's a lot of your experts, so to speak, they're saying, you know what, the grower should have sold more corn when it was $4.70. And one thing I want to point out, part of why I think this year's been so hard, if you take the yield that you gave the banker for operating, for cash flow, whatever, operating note, if you take that yield at $4.70, which, by the way, was 9 cents from the high, you take your yield there, $4.70 minus the basis, could you have called that a profit this year? How many of you guys feel like you've got a better crop than what you told the banker? How many of you guys knew you were going to have the kind of crop that you were going to have back in February? Guys, we haven't had very many opportunities. That's all there is to it. And so clearly everyone likes to hear about markets. I've had several guys come up to me today and ask me, hey, when's this market going to rally? I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't be 3 hours from home if I knew the answer to that question. I'd be somewhere else. But how many of you guys get my newsletter? Okay, how many of you guys deal with Becks already and don't get the newsletter? Okay, talk to whoever you're dealing through. If you have an email in the system, you're supposed to get it. It comes out Wednesday mornings and typically Saturday mornings. I highly doubt I'm going to get today's written. It'll probably come out on Monday, but the weekend newsletter is going to be about twice as long as the weekly, the one during the week. I talk basis, I talk hedging strategies, I talk just general trends about what I think is going on in the market. It's a little longer read, but it's got what I think is fairly decent information. So we're going to go into the markets. Of course, that was my family. I came on board with Beck's June 1st, for those that don't know. I'd been doing this for someone else in the industry for about 13, 14 years. And so I've been doing risk management my whole life. Basically, I grew up on a small farm south of Champaign, about an hour in Illinois. We had grain elevators as well. And so I learned about markets sitting at the kitchen table, and I didn't know I was learning about markets. Markets just kind of came natural to me because it was a way of life. So came on board with Beck's because, quite frankly, our ideologies mesh very well. Okay, my business, ag market, our core pillars are faith, family, and customers, and it's designed for people to say, why do your customers come last? I say because if the first two are correct, customers are going to be very well taken care of. And so whenever I saw the way Beck's has done business over the years and they approached me, I said, yeah, let's rock and roll. So when's the corn market going to rally? How many of you guys saw that report last week and said things that I shouldn't say from the stage? Okay? You saw the report, you're like, oh no, this is not good, right? 188.8, 2 million more acres. Where was the good news, right? What did the corn market do last week? It was down. Do you know how much D's corn was down last week? 1/4 of a penny. Most bearish report I think I've ever witnessed in my life. We were down 1/4 of a penny. And so when's the corn market going to rally? I think the corn market holding status quo over the last several sessions is actually a win. To be totally honest with you. I mean, I've been very pleasantly surprised with the way this thing has acted. In all honesty, if I'm looking at when the corn market's going to rally, I'm going to go into detail here. But old crop and new crop are two totally different discussions right now. And I'm talking old crop is in 25 and then looking out towards 26. Does anybody think we're going to see an acreage shift in 26? Well, I bet somebody a lot of money if they shook their head no there. And I'll tell you why. All right? How big is the crop going to be? Is 188.8 for real? I don't believe so. I think it's below that. Pro Farmer doesn't come out till after the close today. My presentation tomorrow at Becknology Days is going to look a little different because I'm going to have the final number. We're going to dissect it. We're going to look at what they've come up with so far already here today. How big do I think the crop is? Personally, I think due to the poor finish in the Eastern Corn Belt and due to way too much disease in the state of Iowa, I think that we've trimmed the top off. Is it still a record crop? In my opinion, absolutely. But I don't think we're above 185. That's just my opinion. I could be dead wrong. Risk management is about more than the price of corn and beans. How many of you guys have looked at your fertilizer prices and again would have things to say about those that it's not appropriate? Guys, what's fertilizer look like? I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And so risk management is about more than the price of corn and beans. And so what I'm talking about is how many of us have seen years like the 23 crop or the 24 crop this time of year, previous to that year, we had really high fertilizer prices. Why were fertilizer prices high in 22 and 23 going into those crop years? Because we had $6 corn in 22 and we had $5 corn in 23. How many of you guys did the same thing a lot of us did and you booked your fertilizer at excessively high prices and didn't sell any corn? And I know one guy raises it. We got one honest guy in the whole crowd, okay? Kudos to you. If I had a giveaway, I'd give it to you. I don't, so I'm sorry. Well, go to our booth and tell them you were honest, and they'll give you 2 hats instead of 1. But bottom line is, guys, a lot of times fertilizer, you guys know it, I know it. If the price of corn has rallied, fertilizer's going up. That's all there is to it. You can't beat up your local guy because he is basically passing on a price, right? He's got to have some sort of margin. It's not his fault. But if the price of corn would go up excessively between now and next fall, do you think fertilizer is going to go down? Absolutely not. So we got to get out of the habit of booking our fertilizer and then betting on the come on corn prices going up. If fertilizer's high because of the price of corn, lock some corn in too. And then without a commitment to renewable fuels, we've got some big issues for the U.S. growers, my personal opinion. I think we're showing signs that that's the direction we're moving. If you watched soybean oil market yesterday, it rallied 5%, $2.50. Why did soybean oil rally? Renewed enthusiasm about these renewable standards. And so there are some good things going on. I want to show you a slide that I witnessed. This is not my slide. It came from the USDA Outlook Forum. I spoke out there in D.C., or it was actually in Arlington, in February. They asked me to go. First time I ever got to go. It was a pretty awesome experience. But you look back at 2022, average price of corn for cash, $6.54. You've taken 1/3 of the price of corn out in the course of these years, just from 22 till today. How much of input price has gone down? And he laughs. And it's not funny, so we laugh, right? I mean, it's frustrating. Input prices are steady to higher. And we've taken 1/3 of the price of corn out of here. And so this has been a very aggravating deal. Everything is in an inflationary mode except for what? What we're selling. And feel free to take pictures of those slides if you want. At the end, I'll give you a QR code. You can have the whole presentation. My only ask is that you don't redistribute the presentation, but you can have the whole presentation at the end if you want. Whenever I was at the Outlook Forum, and I feel like this next slide is very appropriate because we just had a USDA report, I actually showed this next slide, and being honest here, not everybody in the room laughed at this next slide, but I thought it was funny. Farmers usually think it's funny. When I die, I want the USDA to lower my coffin so they can let me down one last time. And I don't believe Lance Honig laughed at this slide. He's the guy that runs NAS. But I asked him later, I said, were you offended by that? He said, no, I've seen it before. That's the only reason why I didn't laugh. But how many of you guys feel like the U.S. grower thinks the USDA is out to get them? Typically, we feel that way, right? I've had guys tell me over and over and over. One thing I'll tell you is I'm not trying to run afoul for them. I don't want their job. What a big job to do. Okay, how many in the room could tell me today, as close as we are to harvest, within 10 bushel what your whole farm's going to average? With confidence. Anybody? But if they miss it by 2 bushels on 97 million acres, those sons of you-know-whats, right? We get mad. Okay, they've got a big job to do. And so I ask you this, how did they come up with the 188.8? NDVI, or thermal imaging, what's it look like from the air, in farmer surveys. So whenever I've asked guys that are upset with the USDA, I'll say, did you answer your survey? Well, no, I didn't answer your survey. I said, well, you're part of the problem then. If they say I did answer the survey, I say, well, you're part of the problem then. Why? Because the USDA is telling us what we told them, correct or incorrect. That's what's going on, okay? So it's a tough job they've got to do. The problem for all of us is that these numbers are traded as the gospel. Computer algorithms are designed to trade numbers, all right? So if we want to talk numbers, Dees corn, whenever you take the February average of Dees corn over the last 35 years, if March 1st, the average is below the February average, you know how many times in the last 35 years we have not revisited that? 0. Every single year. The last 35 years, we've revisited the December average of December futures for the February average, okay? Now, how many of you guys think we'll see 470 corn again before it goes off the board? You think we will? I want to shake your hand afterwards. I need some of your enthusiasm and optimism. I think it's possible. Is it likely right now? Well, it just depends on what you think this yield's going to come in at. But I would tell you it doesn't look likely. But here's the thing. We have to remember that these markets can change, and they can change violently at times. Let me go back to the USDA Outlook Forum in 24, the year before I spoke. The balance sheet for the USDA, their projection for 24-25. Does anybody know what that projection was for carryout? 2.5 billion bushels. They only missed it by 1.2 billion bushels. What changed? We had excessively cheap prices, and what I just saw you mount it, demand. When you have low prices, it cures low prices because demand comes in. Don't rule anything out. Go back to 2020. Going into 2020, I remember looking at ADM Decatur's cash bids. That's a big hub. They handle 600-800 loads a day. Cash bid for corn before the derecho that went through Iowa was $3.15 a bushel. You had the derecho. Then you had China buy 15-20 million metric tons of corn. And then you had Russia and Ukraine starting their conflict. And whenever they started their conflict, what did the wheat market do? Up 30, 40, 50 cents. When wheat's up 40 cents, does corn go down? No, I don't think so. And so things can change, and so we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I've had a lot of guys tell me at these Becknology deals, I've been to every one of them. I've had guys say, well, I'm just going to cut my losses, sell the corn, and walk away. I don't like that idea, and I'll tell you why as we go through here. Principal crop acres, they're nothing to get excited about. We continue to lose a few acres. I tell this story every time out. I had a farm that my wife and I bought back before the market got super hot. $4,500 an acre is what I paid for a prime piece of Illinois farm ground. It butts up to the edge of town. 2 blocks away is a substation. Who do you think I've heard from? Every solar company in the country. What's the highest offer I've received since I'm that close to the substation? $4,000 per acre per year plus 2.5%. Now I want to ask a question. How many of you guys think I should do it? How many of you guys think I shouldn't do it? And let me guess, everyone's got a very strong opinion on the matter. I'm not asking for that reason. It's this. We're losing tillable farm ground. I've got cousins that put 800 acres into them. I haven't done any. I've got my reasons. They've got their reasons. Once again, the reasons aren't important. We're losing tillable farm ground. Who's not losing tillable farm ground in this world? Brazil. And we're going to talk a lot about Brazil. You look, obviously, principal crop acres have continued to dwindle. And you see CRP staying fairly constant. But this year, guys, we had very low prevent plant. Keep that in mind, that if prevent plant would increase next year, I'm not so sure we even come close to the combined corn and soybean acres that we had this year. I mean, you had very low prevent plant this year. Now, Pro Farmer, state by state, you can look at it. It's very complicated. Whenever they come out with a state yield, typically you have to have kind of a qualifier or a handicap, if you will. Illinois, though, at 199.6, if you add the 3.9 bushels, guys, you're still about 16, 17 bushels below USDA. And it's typically number 1 or number 2 in total corn production. How many total bushels would this add up to if Pro Farmer's correct and USDA is incorrect? Over 200 million bushels. That's a big difference. And you say, well, how's Illinois so bad? Guys, who here is from Illinois? You guys dry? Yeah, I am too. I would have told you August 1st, I got the best corn crop I've ever had in my life, and I'm going to have 260, 70 bushel average. Take 30 to 40 off that now if I'm lucky, because I haven't had a rain since about July 25th, okay? There's a lot of places in Illinois that will have, especially farther north, it's going to be fantastic, but not everywhere. I can tell you that right now. As far as beans go, it's so hard to tell beans, but a dry August is not what you want on a bean crop. And so pod counts have been extraordinary in most of these states, but especially Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Your soil moisture index, which is 0 to 5 on the Pro Farmer Tour, they've been running in the 2s. That's a problem. You got to have rain to be able to, I mean, if I would have had a soaking rain in the last 10 days, I would have had beans that would be 80 bushel beans plus. I haven't had a rain once again since the 25th of July. What are they going to make? Maybe 60, 65? I'm telling you, it's going to be a stark contrast to what they would have been. These, again, are Pro Farmer numbers. You could see you've got a big disparity between what the USDA said and Pro Farmer. If I look at the Pro Farmer Tour results over the years, of course these are going up, but if I look versus the final yield, it's very interesting in that corn, it's almost a wash. Sometimes they're too high, sometimes they're too low. Soybeans, sometimes they're too high, but most of the time they're too low. And then if I look at the results versus the August estimate, whenever you look at corn, they're almost always below the USDA, okay? I'm not picking on the tour. I've been on the tour 5 different times. What I'm telling you is it's highly unlikely, in my opinion, that you see a number here in an hour or two whenever it comes out that is anywhere above 188.8. My guess is Pro Farmer comes in the 185 range, give or take a bushel, okay? Is the trade going to trade it? Probably not. Probably not, unless it's below 185, and then they might. So how many of you guys feel like you're going to make money on corn this year? 3 people. This is the average grower attempt at making money on corn this year. My wife's not in here. She says that slide's inappropriate. I think it's very funny, so we keep it in the presentation. All right. World corn production's up 62 million metric tons. That's a massive increase in world corn production. How's this look on a balance sheet? Coming into 24, you had 315.7 million metric tons. Coming out of 25, a very small drawdown in stocks this year. But here's the thing, Brazil just produced a record crop. U.S. is going to produce a record crop, and over the 2-year window, we're burning through 33 million metric tons of corn. What's this saying? We are not producing enough corn to satisfy demand. Good or bad? That's good. That's actually really good. Now, how many of you guys have said in marketing presentations here in the last 3 or 4 weeks and you wanted to put your hat down and go home with your tail between your legs? No bullish information whatsoever. Guys, would you rather have a demand-led market or a supply-driven market? Demand-led market, it's got staying power. People say, well, what happened in 2012, Matt? I'll tell you what happened in 2012. We had strong demand already, and then boom, you intersect it with a supply shock. That's when you get massive volatility, okay? I'm not telling you we're going to go to the moon next year, and I will tell you, if you read my newsletter, I'm going to be telling you if we get a rally, I'm going to sell incrementally into the rally, and I'll tell you what, if I don't hit the high or even close to the high of the market, I'm fine with it if I make money. What I always say is if your first sale is your worst sale, but it's profitable, it's going to be a pretty darn good year. Do I think we've got a volatility opportunity this next year? Absolutely, because the U.S. grower is not going to plant near the acres of corn next year that they did this year. And I feel confident saying that. U.S. balance sheet, 1.3 billion bushels. How many of you guys looked at these stocks and stocks-to-use ratios over the course of the last 6 months and thought, why is the corn market not rallying? Anybody? Because I've felt the same way, okay? But last winter I said there's 3 distinct things that I think one of these 3 things needs to not happen. And if one of them doesn't happen, we're going to get a rally. What were those three things? We need the Brazilian grower not to raise a huge crop. Well, what happened? It's an all-time record. We need the U.S. grower not to plant a lot of corn. We planted 97 million acres of corn. Well, what was the third thing? The last thing we need is for the U.S. grower to get a big yield on top of big acres. Why did the corn market not rally? The funds never had a reason whatsoever to cover their shorts in the market. They just didn't have a reason to do it. Guys, this is a tight situation. I'll tell you what, you can tell me 2.1 billion bushels of corn is a lot of corn. It is a lot of corn, but if it takes you 97 million planted acres plus 188 to get there, that's a pretty good thing. What's that telling you? If you plant 90 million acres next year, what could possibly go wrong? Bottom line is this. I've got to remember one thing before I get you too bulled up. Let's start dropping that yield down. Let's take the yield down to 185. It gives me a 1.78 carry if I hold demand constant. That's a big if. Here's the deal. How much did USDA increase demand for new crop? You guys know? 545 million bushels. That's significant. 500 million bushels. Why did they do it? If you look at the USDA's history, whenever they raise production, they always raise demand. When they raise production, the assumption is that price is going to do what? It's going to stay low, which will incur even more demand. If they lower yield in September, what do you expect they'll do with demand? They're going to lower demand. We're going to have some corn to deal with. Make no mistake about it. We're going to have some old crop corn to deal with for a while. But the shift of the focus at some point will go to new crop, in my opinion. So, historically low U.S. stocks, but look at world stocks. The stocks to use ratio, as far as world stocks are concerned, are as low as they've been since coming out of the 2012 drought. Okay? Stocks to use. Now, stocks are not an issue. It's stocks to use. Why do I talk stocks to use? Because if I'm a global grain buyer, what am I interested in? How much corn do I have versus what we're using? Because that's what determines price. And so what we've become in so many facets of life is a just-in-time delivery world. We want to have enough to get by, and that's all we need, right? And that works until what? Till it doesn't work. What happens then? Panic. And so if I'm sitting here trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do with this corn crop, I'll tell you what, the last thing I want to do is the bushels that I know have to go to town, I accept what they give me on October the 15th. What's basis going to be if we have a national record yield on October 15th? What do you guys think? Ugly, super wide. You're right, ma'am. It's going to be wide. God forbid you go late in harvest whenever they're dumping it on the ground, and what are they going to tell you then? You can bring it here if you do what? If you sell it. And guess what? Congratulations, here's a 60 under basis. If you've got bushels to go to town, quantify those things before too long. Why? Because the U.S. grower is still historically undersold on new crop corn. Some of these guys are still willing to work with you on basis. And so bottom line is, this is a tighter situation, what we've given it credit for globally. If I look at South American production, up 90% since 2015. That's an incredible number. Now you want to know, what's the difference? Okay, so Brazil raises the world's largest soybean crop, period. Okay, bigger than us. Brazil raises a little more than a third of what we raise for corn. We are the largest corn crop in the world, bar none. Okay? But the thing is, they're growing by leaps and bounds. We'll talk in more detail after we talk soybeans because, guys, their acres are going up for both, while our acres continue to be restricted. Why did we export so much corn this year? It's a pretty incredible stat. You'd have to go back 15 years to see a time when Brazil, Argentina, Ukraine, our largest competitors, had as few stocks of exportable corn as what they had this last year. And so, need I confuse you even further, Brazil had a big crop this year, so they're going to have more exportable corn, okay? We already know that, but we are super competitive on the world market right now, and we've got more new crop export sales on the books going into harvest than we've ever had. That's a really good thing. So, bottom line is, we've got to understand there's a lot of ebb and flow here, all right? I'm going to try to bring this all together at some point, but you look at global exports. If you look at the U.S., the blue line, it's easy to see at the turn of the century, we were exporting half the world's corn. We no longer are even number one. So South America is exporting more corn than what we are. Why do I think it's important that we have domestic consumption? Because we're losing global share on a yearly basis. It's even more stark whenever we look at soybeans. Now there's the chart as of today. Obviously, D's corn wasn't doing much today, but bottom line is this. You took that market down, that big red bar towards the right side of the chart, of course, that was report day, and we plunged, and then we turned around and we headed higher. Now again, let me ask you, why do you think that the corn market was able to be so resilient on report day? Why do you guys think? How many of you guys, when you saw the numbers, thought that the corn market might go down the limit that day? I thought it. We hadn't seen a limit move in how long? But if there was ever a day for a limit move, that would have been it. Why didn't it happen? Because they were expecting a gigantic yield already, first of all. Second of all, what was the bigger thing? The acres that came to corn came from where? Soybeans. You know how far soybeans closed off the low on report day? 39 cents off the low. You think that had anything to do with the fact that the corn market was able to keep going? Absolutely. No beans that week rallied over $0.50. And that's why corn only went down a quarter penny. So world soybean production is a completely different story than corn. World soybean production is up marginally. It's barely even higher. In world soybean supply and use, essentially, we are producing more beans than what we're using. I mean, that's a problem, okay? And so the bean market was up again today. I've seen July beans over $11 for 2 days in a row. How much carry is there from now until next May and July? I've had guys tell me I may put some beans in the bin this year for a change. There's huge carry in the market. It's not a terrible idea by any means, guys. Bottom line is, what's going to happen if Brazil plants more beans? How many of you guys know, like I know, Brazil's going to plant more beans? It's happened every year for 20 years. They average 2 to 3% increase in acres every single year, okay? It's a massive increase. But bottom line is we're not using enough beans globally, okay? U.S. balance sheet, 330 last year was pretty snug. 290 for this year looks extremely snug. What is the major issue with our new crop balance sheet from a demand perspective? Do you guys know? The USDA is forecasting 1.7 billion bushels of beans to be exported. How many beans do we currently have on the books? Pretty much. And I'll show you a chart to show you exactly how many there are as we get closer to the end of soybeans. But we have very few on the books because who's absent? Absolutely. How many of you guys would like to see a trade deal with China here sometime in the very near future? One person. I don't know what the rest of you have a problem with here, but let's talk afterwards. I'm going to educate you on the importance of China here, okay? We need a trade deal. If I take this yield up to 55 bushel, I've still only got 400 million bushels of carry out using that demand. So what am I getting at? I'll tell you what, you go down to 49 bushel and you got a negative carry. Why? Because we've got very strong usage for soybeans domestically. Okay, you won't have a negative carry, we know that. What will happen if you lower yield? They'll lower demand. How do you lower demand? Price increase. I'm not saying beans are going to rally through the roof by any means. What I'm telling you is this. If you get a bean market rally, not only for old crop but for new, I'd be paying very close attention. And I would reward the market on the way up. I would much rather incrementally sell into a rally than feel handcuffed. How many of you guys feel like you're going to hit the high every year? Anybody ever marketed like you're going to hit the high? You guys aren't honest with me, I'll tell you that. You can't hit the low? I'll tell you what, I've had guys, what are you waiting on? If you get $11 beans, they said, I'm waiting on 9, right? Problem is this, guys. We are a master at moving goalposts, okay? Right? Let's say we want to get $11 for our old beans, or at least hedge them on the board of trade. When we get close, I'll call a guy and say, hey, it's $10.95 on the board. You still want to sell some at $11? Nah, I don't want to do that now. Why? Because whatever's driving the market's going to keep driving the market. And that's our mentality. What are the two emotions you struggle with the most when it comes to marketing? Fear of missing out. Because if you guys think I'm bearish today, what are you going to do? Some of you might go home and sell a few bushels. If you do that, what's going to happen tomorrow? The market's going up. You're going to say, I freaking can't stand that new marketing guy, right? How many of us, though, have thought about the fact that if we're worried about what the market's going to do tomorrow, we're never going to sell any today? The other thing's greed. Anybody greedy in here? When it comes to our crop, we get married to it, correct? We have a hard time getting away from it. And my wife's in here now. I got to be really careful what I say. But I hear that term all the time, right? Oh, my husband gets married to that crop. It's hard. It's hard to market it because bottom line is this. What's a 10-cent rally mean to some of these operations? It's a massive amount of money. We understand that. But the bottom line is, once again, I want to incrementally reward this thing. 25 out of 28 states this year planted less bean acres. That's a huge percentage. And so bottom line is, I don't expect 25 out of 28 states to plant more beans next year, but I'll be shocked if we don't see at least 20 states with more beans. That's all there is to it. If I look at the global situation, obviously global stocks are more than adequate to counter this really tight situation domestically. So moving forward, what do we have here? I think we've got a need to keep our domestic situation tight enough that we at least keep our prices from completely plummeting. Bottom line is, you've got a tight situation in the U.S., plentiful in the world. We need domestic consumption to stay strong. Now, South America, you only have a 40% increase for soybeans, whereas for corn, you had a 90% increase. Why is that? Because they've been planting beans in mass a lot longer than what they've been planting corn. Safrinha crop has gotten much more popular over the last several years. Bottom line is this. If you look at this production, people wonder, why do they keep producing more? Why do you guys think they keep growing? Huh? Well, I mean, why would they keep growing? Huh? What are they doing? Making money, right? Okay, so I was at a conference a few years ago, and a group of Brazilian growers were on this panel. One of the growers, not even close to the largest grower in Brazil, but they farmed 350,000 acres. So it was a big operation. And Max Armstrong was moderating. He said, how much money did you guys gross last year? He said, 250 million or so. He said, what was your profit margin on that? He said, 35%. That ain't bad. If you guys got 35%, what would you do? Try to grow, right? Now, in fairness, I read an article yesterday, one of the largest lenders in Brazil, they said they've got 600,000 clients, 20,000 of them are in default right now. So this is a completely different environment today, but don't fool yourself. For many years, some of these operations grew and they were making significant chunks of money. Right now, they're struggling though. So if the U.S. farmer's struggling with profit margins, do you think any other corn farmers in the world are struggling with profit margins? What do you typically see happen then? Acres increase whenever the price of corn goes up, correct? What happens when it goes down? It restricts. I'm telling you, we could be entering a very interesting time period here. Look at this global export situation. South America is essentially tripling the U.S. Tripling the U.S. And so why do I think domestic consumption is important? Does anybody in the room think that we're ever going to export close to as many beans as South America ever again? There's no way in God's creation that's going to happen. I don't care if they have a drought. I mean, I care. I don't want to sound callous. I always say I don't wish ill will on those guys down there publicly. You know, I mean, I'm friends with a lot of them on Twitter, and I talk to them. But bottom line is, even if they have a drought situation, guys, they've grown in acres so much, and they've got such an expanse that they grow in, you're still going to raise enough. They're going to export more than what we are by a landslide. So that's what our new crop export sales look like. I put that on there for a reason. Where were we at a year ago? Same place. We're in the same place. What happened last fall? China was buying soybeans with reckless abandon throughout harvest. Here's the problem. China's bought a lot of their September beans already, and they've got some of their October needs filled as well. Why? Because Brazil just had a massive bean crop, and they had a lot of exportable supply of soybeans. Do you think China's going to buy beans off the U.S. if they don't have to? No. Do you think they're going to try to apply maximum pressure before they go ahead and start their purchasing program? You better believe it, okay? That's what's going to happen. There's what your November bean chart looked like here just a little bit ago. November beans have established themselves above all moving averages at this point. I don't want to be a technician, but all of these lines coming through here, as you can see, go anywhere from 10-day to 200-day moving averages. And so basically the bean market's trying to establish it at itself at a higher level than what it was before. Technically, this bean market's in really good shape, okay? So if you hear that, you think, well, gee whiz, I'm not going to sell any beans. Well, I've been saying in the newsletter, if you've been reading, before the report, I said, I don't have anything good to say about beans, but why would I sell beans right now before I see how August is going to turn out, right? I'm not going to lock a loss in before I at least give this bean market a chance to run. Now, November beans have been up about 70 cents since then, okay? One thing I always say is if you ignore a rally and you don't end up rewarding it with any bushels, when that rally goes away, who do you have to blame, right? Respect rallies, at least with incremental sales. So we're going to talk about managing risk. So I've had a lot of guys who've come up to me and said, hey, now that you're doing this stuff with Becks, we need you to help us work our way out of the situation we're in. And I'm like, that's a tough thing to do. I'm just trying to help you market. But I've had more and more guys come up to me, I really need your help. And I was trying to think of one slide to try to explain how I feel when everyone asks me how I'm going to do this, and it's this one. I got no idea, okay? Sorry, I want to have some fun here. When the markets stink, you got to put some funny slides in. Okay, I will tell you what I'm going to do, all right? As far as the NDVI goes, though, that's how does the crop look from the air? The crop last week from the air was the best looking crop since we started doing thermal imaging at this point in the growing season we'd ever seen. Why'd the USDA come in where they came? Because that's what the crop looked like, okay? Now, how many of you guys have talked to growers or as yourself walked into a field that it doesn't look anything like you thought it looked from the road? Anybody? I was in El Paso last week at Becknology Days, and I talked to a grower after my presentation. He said, you can blame me for the big USDA number. I said, why is that? He said, I gave him a 240 all farm yield. He said, that's what I thought I had. He said, but my agronomist and I were in the field on Monday and Tuesday of this week. He got his phone out, started showing me pictures, tipped back about that much. I said, what'd the agronomist say? He said, I got bad news for you. He said, I don't think your whole farm will even average 200. Now, I'm not saying every hybrid was affected the same way. I'm just telling you what the grower told me. And so the problem is, whenever we've got, on my farm, 14 nights in a row with lows that didn't get under 70, that's an issue, all right? Stress degree days. Elwin Taylor talks about stress degree days, and he says when you get above 150 stress degree days, you start to lose yield. Champaign, Illinois, which is north of me, has had 190 as of Monday. And you're going to tell me that we haven't hurt this crop some. I think I started with massive yield potential on my farm, and I think I've dialed it back. Do I think it's a bad crop? No. But you have to be clicking on every cylinder imaginable to hit a 188.8 on 97 million acres. Obviously, the crop was rated really good, good to excellent. I'm not a fan of good to excellent conditions. My personal opinion on them is that you've got 3 or 4 guys riding around in a pickup with a case of beer, and they look at the crop and they say, hey, this looks pretty darn good, right? Do you think they get out in the field every weekend? Probably not. This is, how does the crop look? Does it look good? It absolutely does look good. Part of the issue that I've got is that where the rain has been falling in the last month, is where the rain keeps falling. And so when I was in Colfax, Iowa, I talked to growers that said we sprayed fungicide and then I had 18 inches of rain or 20 inches of rain in the month of July. Do you think fungicide's going to hold in that position? No. But do you want, with $4 corn, to have $80 wrapped up in fungicide application? It's a tough call, isn't it? Absolutely, because the area to the south and east of there is where I reside and where some of you guys reside. And guess what? We can't buy a rain where we can't get a rain, and those guys keep getting rain. I think agronomically it's going to cause some issues. Clearly, temperatures were a problem. 14 days in a row is too long. So Dr. Belo from the University of Illinois says after you get past 4 nights in a row of 70-degree and above lows on the overnight, you start to hurt the crop 1% per day. Again, I had 14 of them in a row. I think my crop's been hurt, but again, I think it started out really good. Now let's talk about renewable fuels. Before the EPA put out their new renewable fuels recommendations, EPA and the EIA were both saying this industry is done growing, is essentially what they said, until we get new data, okay? But then you had the big, beautiful bill, and you had the EPA proposed volume requirements. Basically, they're saying we're going to see an expansion of the industry. Now, what caused the industry to get into a stalling mode? What did we use a lot of to make renewable diesel last year? You guys know? Used cooking oil. Where was it coming from? The red, as you can see, came out of China. Up until the big, beautiful bill, you could take used cooking oil, imported used cooking oil, get the maximum tax benefit that we allowed as a federal government, okay? China was taking cheap palm oil and adding, as long as they had 1% used cooking oil, they called it used cooking oil, they got the maximum tax benefit, and palm oil was cheap. Finally, someone said, this makes no sense. This makes no sense. And yes, Washington, D.C. made a decision that made sense, okay? I'm sorry, I'm not a politician. But anyway, you know, what they said now is you can use used cooking oil in the making of renewable diesel if it comes out of North America and get the maximum tax benefit, but not imported. This is good for soybean oil whenever it gets right down to it. Now, fertilizer. How many bushels does it take to buy all these different products? It's continued to go higher. It's super frustrating. My next slide is where I try to bring this together from a fertilizer standpoint. These are my local prices. As you can see, DAP for prepay is $8.85 versus $6.55 prepay 1 year ago. Okay? What's the price of December corn when I put this together yesterday versus what it was a year ago? $4.50 versus $4.41. The corn to soybean ratio 1 year ago was 2.3 to 1. This year it's 2.37 to 1. And the higher the ratio, the more that a producer is likely to go towards soybeans. Now, if you're in a position, let's just say this, 17 million acres is what the gap was this year. 17 million acres between corn and bean acres. What do you guys think the gap will be next year? Huh? I didn't hear you. You think the gap between corn and bean acres will be bigger than what it was this year? Small. Thank you. I was going to say, I'd bet you a $100 bill on that here in a minute. Why? Because the corn to beans, beans to corn guys, which there's a lot of them still, the natural progression is going to be that bean acres are going to come up, first of all. Does anybody think that fertilizer prices are going to impact some people's decisions for the coming year? First of all, that will. Second of all, I did the Illinois Bankers Conference yesterday in Springfield, Illinois, and guess what? When I asked the question, are there going to be growers that don't get the same amount of money in 26 that they got for the 25 crop, I had a lot of this going on. Now, I don't think it's going to be a lot of portfolios, but I think every bank will have some portfolios that are going to have to be dialed back just a little. Because if we burnt through liquidity the last 3 years, has anybody burnt through liquidity? One guy says yes. I have. I'll tell you that right now. Bottom line is, you look at the University of Illinois numbers, and they're saying in Northern Illinois, the budget for 26 is a $72 an acre loss right now, using their cost, a $3 gain for beans. Central Illinois, negative 82 versus $18 gain for beans. Do you think that guys are going to be looking at this? Man, I would think that they're going to be looking at this, especially whenever it costs me $1,000 an acre to put a corn crop in. It doesn't cost me near that to put a soybean crop in. So if November 26 beans get close to $11, what might a guy want to think about doing? Do you think they'll be $11 next fall without a drought? I don't. How many of you guys think that I'm going to sell beans at $11 and haven't thought about maybe the fact that everyone and their brother wants to sell beans at $11? Has anybody ever had that extra penny cost you 50 cents? If you know you can make money at $10.95, my friends, hedge off some beans if they get up there. We're not far away right now. You look at U of I again, and again, I know this is Farm Doc, but if you look at Farm Docs, they study everyone in the Midwest. But this particular study comes out of FBFM, which these guys look at guys' books. I mean, these are actual numbers. And they're saying this will be the 4th year in a row for 26 as a projection that the grower loses money. 4th year in a row. And so here's the deal. How many of us made a lot of money in 21 and 22 back to back? I know nobody wants to admit it, but it's the truth, and you guys know it is. Most of your universities will say it was the most profitable back-to-back years for most growers in their entire career. Okay? The problem is we went from the penthouse to the outhouse, and it's been tough. But this too will pass at some point. So, if you want the presentation, hover over it, click the yellow thing. You can have it. I just don't want you to redistribute it. Do we have one at 2:15? We do. Okay, so I've got a couple minutes. I'm going to get, anybody have any questions while people are trying to get the QR code? Is there a question? Okay, this is what I'm going to do. If you don't get the QR code, I want you to go to our booth, and you can still get the QR code. Has anybody seen our Profitability app in the Customer Rewards book? I want to show it to you real quick because I want to show you how I tie all this marketing together into a risk management situation, okay? So, this particular farm has a 225 yield goal, a 210 APH, all right? What's that give me a break even at? $4.40 a bushel. Cost per acre is just under 1,000. This is a round figure type number. Why is my dynamic break even lower? Because if you make a sale above your initial break even, that means that the remaining bushels you have to sell can be sold at a lower level and still make money. Okay? I've had people tell me, how many of my costs do I need to have in there? Everything. Do I need to have family living expense? I say, does anybody work off the farm? Because if they don't, who's going to pay the family living expense, right? And so bottom line is, this is dialed in pretty good. Okay, one thing I like about this, the value of unsold grain, $753,000. It's 200,000 bushels of unsold grain. When the market was down 15 cents on report day, 15 cents stinks, correct? But what stinks more, 15 cents or $30,000 loss in your balance sheet? I want to look at it every day. I want to know, what does a market move cost me? Because how many of us have had corn in the bin and we feel like if the market goes down, it's no big deal. I still got corn in the bin. You know, we've got to treat it. We got to treat it appropriately. So what I can do in here is I can come in and I can look at some scenarios. For this particular example, I want to look at 6 different price scenarios. How am I going to manage risk here? All right, so with these particular price scenarios, I'll go all the way to the bottom, and it's between $3 and $5.50. As you can see, if the market goes to $3, yes, crop insurance will take place for some of us if we've bought it, but you could lose over $500,000 on this farm with no risk management whatsoever. I'll make one simple change. I got 200,000 bushels at risk right now. I'm going to sell 100,000 bushels of December corn, and look what happens. Now I've more than cut my potential loss in half, okay? Now I can play with this and play with this. What's my goal? Is to make my worst case scenario something I can live with. I want to quantify the bushels that are at risk versus the bushels that are not at risk. And so I want to go back in and make one other change. Anybody in here care to admit that they've got a bigger crop than what they were planning on? How much? A lot. Well, that's pretty specific. 20, 25 bushel an acre? What are you thinking? 25. Okay, so my break-even price before I'm going to make this adjustment was $4.29 a bushel. All right, I want you to see what happens here. And I know all of you are going to go shake his hand afterwards after you see this. We're going up to $2.50. What's the break-even do? $3.62 a bushel. We just dropped our break-even 60 cents a bushel because we were more realistic about our yield. So here's the deal. Here's the deal. I got to be out in the middle of my fields right now and see exactly what I got. If the agronomist tells me I feel confident that you're too low on yield, get to something believable that's still conservative, raise it up, because a lot of guys have told me I can't make money selling corn today. But you know what? If you don't know whether or not you can make money because you don't have your numbers dialed in, that's a big problem. We're not in an era where we can just market any time of the year and make money like we were in 21 and 22, guys. That was too easy. We got spoiled. I know we'd all like to go back there, but that's not where we're at. Any questions before I step off the stage? If you want the app, okay, in the customer rewards, it's the 3-point product. But if you're a Beck's customer, you can use the app for free till September 15th to see whether you like it or not. Just go to our booth. It's when you were going to lunch, you went right past it. It's got a big ag market sign. We've had a bunch of guys go in there and gals, and they've snapped it to where they can go in and they can try it out, see whether you like it or not. If there's no questions, I got to get off here for the next person. Thank you.